Welcome back to CFB Nation. I'm your host, Nino Brown. You're watching Devy Darling. I got a very special guest this evening. He's one of the brain trusts for C2C. That would be Matt Bruning. How we doing this afternoon? This evening? I know you had a busy day, but how you doing?
I'm good, man. I appreciate you having me on. I'm excited to talk about a fun and upcoming running back.
See, now, everybody says on Twitter that people can't get along and have interesting conversations. Me and Matt have gone back and forth multiple times about college things, and we get along. So, it's just, if you can't have good conversations about things, like you said to me before, it would just be boring, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't get why people get so upset. It's okay to have different opinions. We're not always going to be right. I know I'm not always going to be right. I thought it was a very productive conversation. I mean, you and Jared had different opinions than I did on ours, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like, whether you guys are right or I'm going to be right, it was a very fun conversation. I feel like anybody who was looking at the comments during our conversation, like, it didn't get negative. We didn't yell at each other. We didn't say anything mean to each other. We said, well, this is where I'm coming from. This is where you and Jared were coming from. And at the end of the day, like, it was just a great conversation to have. People got to see both sides of the argument on what we think is going to happen with Arch Manning. So, yeah, it was awesome.
Yeah, some people kind of take it to hot, though, on the Angry Blue Bird. That's what I call it, because, and then you go down this big rabbit hole. But I appreciate you. I respect your work. Speaking of your work, why don't you tell the people before we dive into it where they can find your stuff?
Oh, man, everything I do is at Campus to Can. So you can find it there. If you want to look for me on Twitter, it's at Sports Fanatic MB. But everything I do is with CampusToCan.com.
Like I said, he's part of the brain trust over there at C2C. So we're going to be talking about, a gentleman got a lot of hype coming into it. He's got a buzz. He could be the guy this year. That'll be 2023 5-star running back out of Edgewater High School, Clearview, Florida, Cedric Baxter Jr. This guy, he checks all the boxes for me. He's got it all. He's power. He's got when he makes one cut, he's already looking for green pastures. Okay, he's got speed and size, which I think is going to be scary for these defenses, especially these small linebackers and safeties who play in the box. He looks big for the pot, 6'1", 215. What are your thoughts on him? Before we break down his high school stuff, what are your thoughts on him as like a typical running back?
Yeah, I think he is one of the better running backs we've seen come out of high school. I think he can do it all. We didn't get to see a lot of receiving in high school, but still, I think he is a very good receiving back. As you mentioned, he's very good at cutting. I think he's got great vision in the backfield as well, and really good patience, which is something I look for in a running back. He just knows when to hit the hole, when to kind of allow his blockers a couple more seconds to open it up and then go. And then when he gets into the second level, he's got a really good burst. I don't know that he's got the long speed that you want to equate to those elite running backs who can like burn you for 60 yards constantly, like a Travis Etienne. But he's got enough speed to get to the end zone and hit home run plays. But it's really the burst, the vision, and the speed for me that I think make him really special.
Yeah, there was a few games I watched, the highlights of Don Bosco game, Bishop Moya. He kind of gave me the Bijan vibe, where he made so many moves in a phone booth, and then all of a sudden, like you said, the burst out of the pack. And once he was out of the pack and cut outside the hash, he was just going for 50, 60-yard touchdowns. Now, at the next level, everybody's going to be a little bit more, advanced than what you're playing, in high school. So it'll be interesting to see. Like we talk about high school, in his career there, almost 500 attempts, almost 4,000 yards. He averaged 7.7 yards per rush, 57 touchdowns, right? Over 4,000 all-purpose yards in 39 games. I mean, those numbers are just crazy. The kid played both sides of the ball, too. Played linebacker and DB, right?
Yep.
Getting varsity snaps as a freshman, which is kind of crazy. And like you said, we didn't get to see as much. He only had 17 receptions for 246 yards, but he did average, over 14 yards per catch. And he had 11 touchdowns this past season in his first 7 games, which is just, it's crazy. The production, like, who would you compare coming out of high school with the production he had in just 2 year span?
Oh man, coming out of high school, that's a hard one. As this is, is we've been doing this for a couple years, but I haven't been quite as deep into the recruiting, except for like the last couple years. A player that I compare him to skill wise is Darren McFadden, but I'm going to be honest, I don't remember Darren McFadden's high school career at all, so it's kind of hard for me to comp him to a player coming out of high school. But that's the player that I would comp him to overall in his abilities and what I think he can do in college and at the NFL level.
All right, I love McFadden was dude like that. It was just inevitably the jump step ended up getting to him over after a while. But I got a combination of like Arian Foster and Matt Forte, but just a little bit more power, right? Because those guys are elusive. Once they kind of got outside and out of the pack, they were able to pull away. I think Arian Foster had a little bit more of like that burst to pull away from guys where I don't know if Baxter has that, but in the elusiveness, the movement in short range, I think both of those gentlemen, he kind of has a game like that. Well, let's talk a little bit about, this year, what we expect. I mean, the kid just went off for so many 200-yard games last year in high school. It was crazy. I think he had 4 out of 6 200-yard games. Yeah. Now, we saw a little glimpse of it in the spring game, right? But everybody kind of got a little bit of that. 11 attempts, 28 yards, touchdown. We saw a little bit of it in the Under Armour game, but that's kind of like, like a Pro Bowl, if you think about it. Everybody's just had that 13-yard touchdown off the right side. But it's kind of a crowded backfield, right? They don't know I feel on offense, that might be the only question mark really for them is who's going to be the guy. I kind of said to you off camera, like true freshmen don't really kind of take that role to start.
Right. Yeah.
Was he that guy though? Can he do it? Because I've been a Jadon Blue guy for a long time, hoping and praying that he's just going to come to fruition. And I kind of let that shit pass, especially when he committed. So what do you think? Do you think he could take over that room right away?
I don't know about right away, but I do think he can take over at this point, at some point in the 2023 season. I mean, you mentioned his 100-yard games in high school, and I want to point back to that for a second. I mean, he had 10 100-yard games in high school, and 8 of them coming in his last 2 years there as a junior and a senior when he really kind of came on and was just a full-time running back. You mentioned at the beginning he was playing on defense as a freshman and sophomore, so he wasn't doing a lot of running back. So this is a guy who's already developed and evolved into, at least in my opinion, the best running back in this class, and he wasn't even playing it to start his early high school career. So to show those developments, I think is incredible. On top of that, he is the biggest back in the Texas running back room with 6'1", 210. We have seen that if you go all the way back to his time at Washington, Steve Sarkisian, he's talked about it in interviews and everything. It's something a lot of people bring up is that anytime he has been a head coach for a full season, I want to put in the full season because he was at USC for a year and he was coached for, I believe it was 6 games before he was fired. He has had a 1,000-yard running back, and we're going back to Washington with Chris Polk, 1,113 yards, 1,400 yards. Then they had in 2011 was his last year with Chris Polk, and Chris Polk started as a true freshman, by the way, in Washington 2009. Last year with Chris Polk, 1,400 yards. Then Bishop Sankey takes over in his sophomore year. That's a name everybody remembers, right? If you've been playing Dynasty long enough, he was going in the first round, right? I
thought he was a guy. I did.
Hey, we all did, right? I mean, it was he was in that Steve Sarkisian offense, 1,400 yards in his first year, 1,800 yards in his second year with 28 receptions. That's the key part that I haven't even been bringing up with the receptions. In Bishop Sankey's first year, 1,400 yards rushing, 33 receptions for 249 yards. Like, he was throwing to backs in college when this was not popular. I mean, you go back to 2012, you were not throwing to running backs that much. Like, I think people forget how much not just the NFL, but the college game has changed when it comes to receiving. Running backs were not that big. Like, you brought up Matt Forte, and I actually kind of love that comp because he was doing it before it became really popular and sexy. Right. Could you imagine Matt Forte in today's game doing what he did back then? It would be talked about like CMC's talked about. Like, he was an incredible running back. So then you go to his time at USC. And here's another name, if you've been playing Dynasty football long enough, Javorius Buck Allen. I mean, he was a guy, lands with the Ravens. We're like, oh, man, with the way they run the ball. Yeah. Exactly. Ray Rice, he's going to be the receiving back. And unfortunately, he never worked out.
Mm-mm.
41 receptions in his first year as a running back for Steve Sarkisian's offense with 1,400 rushing yards. Then he goes on to the NFL. It's Justin Davis, and he even lets, and this is key to me, a true freshman, Ronald Jones, get some run. He got 153 carries for 987 yards. Now, this was the year that he ended up getting fired. So if you go and look at the USC stats, neither one of those guys broke 1,000 yards. It was 987 for Ronald Jones. Justin Davis had 902. But if they would have stayed the whole year, I guarantee you they would have gone over with the way that he was giving them the ball. Then we're going to go really quick to Alabama. Najee Harris, 1,200 yards, 27 receptions. 2020, which was his year, this, in my opinion, is what got him the Texas job with what he was able to do with Devonta Smith and winning him a Heisman. He gets Mac Jones to the Heisman, gets him first-round draft capital, 1,400 yards on 251 carries, 43 receptions for 425 yards, and Brian Robinson, who was there both years, also got pretty decent workload with 96 carries, 11 catches, and then 91 carries and 6 catches. So, with all that being said, go back through Steve Sarkisian's history. He prefers these running backs that are already NFL size. And I didn't put Bijan on here because he had Bijan technically for 2 years. But if you go back to Bijan's freshman year, it was, I believe, still Tom Herman was the head coach of Texas. They didn't use Bijan out the gate. In fact, I believe it was the second game, Bijan started blowing up, and then if you look for it, you can find it. His infamous tried to hurdle a guy, got flipped, landed, and had that weird landing on his neck, and everybody thought, oh my God. And then Bijan just jumped up because he's an alien, and nothing affects him, right?
Right.
But then Steve gets there in his second year, and it's nothing but Bijan because he knows what he has.
Yes.
I like Jonathan Brooks. I like Jadon Blue. Jadon Blue is my RB1 over Nick Singleton, which looks like probably going to be a bad call now, which is as good as Nicholas Singleton was.
I was right there with you, bud. So.
Yeah, I mean, he's an incredible running back, but neither one of those guys, I don't think it's unfair to say, are as talented as as Cedric Baxter. I don't know that he starts off the season as the guy, but I do think at some point he takes over. And to be honest with you, I would not be surprised if it's a very much a three-headed committee the first couple games. But I really think Sarkisian is likely going to lean on his veterans in Brooks and Blue early on because they get Alabama in week 2. So it's going to be hard to be like, hey, I'm going to give this true freshman the ball in a massive game in Tuscaloosa. But at some point in time this season, I would not be surprised if by week 5 or 6, all of a sudden Cedric Baxter is matching carries with who I think it's going to be Jadon Blue, because I just think both of them are better than Jonathan Brooks. I think both those guys are going to be out there and they're going to be dominating. And then you're going to see a year 2 and year 3 of Cedric Baxter, much like what we saw out of Bijan Robinson. And when I say that, I'm just talking about putting up stats and being productive on the field. I don't want to compare him to Bijan Robinson because Bijan is a much better player. Even he deserves to be in a tier of his own when we talk about how great running backs are. But I do think that he will produce to that level in a Sarkisian offense.
See, now you don't think Red's going to take any way? Because I know this, the game, the white and orange game. I mean, it doesn't really mean anything, right? Because they're just going to put people out just for a product. But he had just as many attempts as Baxter, right? I think they both had 11, and then the other gentleman had 14. So it's like I worry. Like you say, three-headed, but like you said, there's a big game early. I think Texas wins that game. I think they were going to. I think they should have won that game last year. If Quinn doesn't get hurt, they win the game. Like in my eyes, I don't know where you were at on that.
No, I'm with you. I'm with you.
Yeah. And I think it's going to be problems for Nick after week 2 because being 1-1 start week 3 is not going to be good. But I think you're right. I don't know if it's Blue. Who's bigger? Is Johnson bigger or is Blue bigger?
Jonathan Brooks is bigger. Jadon Blue is, I want to say he's listed at like 6 foot. So I think he was listed when coming into college, he was listed over 200 pounds. And I know the first week that he was weighed at Texas, I think they weighed him at like 189 because that set alarm bells off for everybody because you want your running backs to be bigger. And he's added weight each year. But the one thing that, you probably know, but anybody who's listening who may not know, when we talked about Jadon Blue, he didn't play his senior year. So even though he may have been training and doing whatever to stay in shape for football, like it's completely different training, even at a high school level, than going into college and getting into that weight and nutrition program and everything to get your weight up and put the healthy weight on. And then supposedly he's added weight every year. I don't think they have an official weight for him yet, but the last I heard, I'm almost positive he was up in the 190s and getting closer to 200. And I mean, I just think he's a better back than Jonathan Brooks, but it does help that Brooks has been there for 2 years.
Right.
We've seen a lot of coaches, they love to lean on those vets, especially early on, just because they know the system. And I do think Jonathan Brooks is a good running back. I don't mean it in a negative way toward him, but I definitely think Blue and then Baxter are better overall in their games than Jonathan Brooks.
I mean, you mentioned Shark and what he does for running backs and how they get, he gets. Look at Roshan, okay? Like, Roshan stood knowing that he wasn't going to be the guy, knowing that the alien was going to be the man no matter what, right? Yeah. Didn't really have crazy numbers, but got himself decent draft capital, got him to a good situation in Chicago. So it's like, it's there. If you can't see it, then you're obviously watching the game with blinders on. I think, is it crazy to say that he could have close to Singleton numbers this year? Because I know Singleton still gave up carries to Allen, right? So like he's going to be given up. He has a Singleton. Yeah, I mean, he's right up there as, top back off the rip, right off the rip.
Yeah, I mean, off the top of my head, and I could be wrong here. So anybody in the comments, you make sure to fact check us. I'll be in here and let you know. But I believe Singleton had a right around or maybe just over 900 rushing yards. I would not be surprised if Baxter's able to do that. Now, again, Baxter does not have the breakaway speed that Singleton does. We had Singleton at 22 miles per hour, which is beyond special, especially at his size.
Yeah,
I mean, anybody over 21 is very good. So to hit over 22 again, and I mean, I may probably get this wrong, but I believe Singleton's over 220. Like, that's special. Yeah. I mean, he's a unit. Baxter, we had at 21.5. So that's not bad. That's very good speed for a guy, again, who's at 210. And I don't even know that he uses his speed that much. There were times that he's not afraid to take on contact. He'll hit you with a nasty stiff arm. He likes those, as you mentioned, the one cut moves as well. So that's something we could even see more of in college as he developed. Because I don't think I mentioned it, but you mentioned he played at Edgewater. They played a top 70 strength of schedule record in high school, which is very impressive. Like, you guys think about it. Anybody watching this thinking about it from the NFL side of things, they talk about strength of schedule. Like, to play a top 70 doesn't sound like a lot, but that is a really, really impressive schedule. And I'm going to be honest, if you go look at Edgewater's team, outside of Cedric Baxter, there's not a lot of these top end like guys we'll be talking about on Devy shows or anything moving forward. So he kind of carried those offenses. So it's extremely impressive he was able to do that. And again, that was only 2 years playing running back. Right. He's got all this time to develop behind it. In my opinion, a great offensive coach in Steve Sarkisian.
You mentioned the program. They played week 1 was Bishop Moore. Then it was Don Bosco, West Orange, Jones, Apaka. That right there, those 5 teams are like top-ranked high school teams.
Yeah.
And the kid went off for 22 carries, 26 carries, 21 carries, 28 carries, 20 carries. And 4 of those 5 games, he went over 220 yards rushing. For like 11 touchdowns. So it's like the kid is a dude. He's going to be very special. He's definitely a Devy Darling in my eyes. I know in your eyes he is as well. And he's in a perfect scheme. I think Texas is a perfect scheme for him. With the weapons that they placed around Quinn, he's going to be an asset to Quinn because he can take the heat off him. What is it? The only thing I didn't really get to see too much is what's his pass pro like? So
that part is intriguing because I don't know that he is. You mentioned Roshan Johnson. I think that's one area that Roshan really kind of grew on NFL scouts and why he was so highly touted coming into the draft. He was an incredible pass blocker. I don't know that Baxter is there yet. You don't see a lot of running backs asked to do that in high school. So that part I don't know. It's again another reason why I would not be surprised if he's not on the field a ton, and probably where they're going to lean on Jonathan Brooks, although he's not massive, and I don't know that he's even that good of a pass blocker, but I think what will help him is, you mentioned the perfect system. It's an offensive line that was mostly freshmen last year that now is gelled into their second season, and he'll get that again next year. So we'll have to see. That'll be something that, we will have to watch when he plays this year, probably more next year and the year after on the pass blockings. I don't know. They'll ask him to do a lot of that as a freshman, but as of now, I probably would say that's incomplete. I'm going to be honest with you. I don't remember watching any of his high school reps and seeing him ever pass block, so it's kind of hard to say if he can or can't do it.
Yeah, that's why I asked you, because everything I see, I mean, he caught a few few screens here and there. He set him out wide a couple times, but like most of it was in between the hash, up the gut. Again, once he got through the traffic, and then he would get outside. Like I said, looking for greener pastures. So yeah, I'm all in on Cedric Baxter. I know you're all in. Like I said, he's definitely a Devy Darling. Before we close it out, once again, Matt, tell the people at home where they can find your work.
Oh, yeah. Everything's at campus2canton.com. And thank you so much for having me on. It's been a long time coming. Should have done this sooner. I appreciate you giving me a couple minutes.
I appreciate you coming on. You're a busy guy. And like I said, thanks again. I'm Nino Brown at CFB Nation.